Hey Kings, and welcome back to the Augustus Maximus channel, and again, playing some Impartial War as Greece in the Minor Factions Revenge mod, with a bit of post-commentary this time, because the recording software somehow corrupted the audio or something, it just wasn't coming through, so with a bit of post-commentary this time. And I think that's actually relatively okay. It just gives me more time to talk about the individual aspects of the strategy going forward when it comes to this campaign without needlessly being distracted by a variety of stuff. Well, first of all, what did you miss between episode 1 and episode 2? As you can see, we did actually start our military build-up a little bit, and we have roughly a full stack and like 5 to 6 units extra, which means that we are actually in quite a safe space. We also have a new king, Zacharias the First, who is a 4-star king as opposed to the first king who was a 3-star king, so we're actually in quite good shape. And because he's such a good king, it's actually quite beneficial, because it means that diplomatically more people like you, and your prestige goes up. Our overall gold income, or just income in general, actually went down quite a bit because I was recruiting so much, but I didn't really raise the taxes because, well, I just want that growth. And the growth aspect of Total War is actually quite underestimated, or it was quite underestimated before the individual, Warhammer Total War games were released, and Rome 2 Total War and Attila Total War. Not many people actually talked about individual city growth that much as an important aspect of playing like Empire Total War, Napoleon Total War, etc., etc. But I think lowering the taxes and letting our cities grow over time is actually quite a beneficial route to take, especially if you're a small country and you're just slowly starting to grow. It's actually quite important that your cities be as that they live to their potential, because while short-term raising the tax is quite beneficial, it's not actually all that great in the long run. Another change, obviously, as you can see, Poland and Lithuania is completely dead, and Prussia took it all. Russia didn't take a single bit. Prussia just took everything, complete blitzkrieg through Poland and Lithuania, and Russia at this moment is at war with Prussia itself, which is quite strange because Russia actually likes Prussia. So that might have played actually a pretty big role in the whole scenario. We also have a whole bunch of new ministers that are actually quite decent, and we got a new minister here, and I don't think he's actually all that, well, he's not up to the job anyway, because all our other ministers are actually incredibly good, which is quite curious. It's turning out that our government actually is among one of the best in Europe, it would appear, because we have a pretty decent king. Our ministers are very high rank. They're not the best, but they're not the worst. In general, in this mod, what I've seen from playing different nations, some nations have really terrible ministers, and some nations just have the luck of having just randomized really good ministers. For example, the United States has really good ministers, and it would appear that Greece as well has some of the best ministers around. But moving forward, as you can see, Austria did take Bosnia, which is actually quite interesting, because it means that we now have, well, a direct land route to one of our allies and to one of our, well, members of the anti-Ottoman alliance between Russia, Austria, and Greece, or soon to be Greece. We're about to attack them anyway, because this is quite the opportunity. Austria just took Bosnia, and so I think we're actually gonna go for Serbia this time. It's probably the best strategy. I was really thinking about it for quite a while, because going for Istanbul, or soon to be Constantinople anyway, is quite a bold move. It means that we leave ourselves quite open, whereas we're taking all the individual states in the Balkans is actually quite beneficial to us, because we get to sweep through some of the maybe less rich territories of the Ottoman sphere. However, taking just Istanbul directly would lead to an incredibly long fight, and because the Ottomans are at war with both Austria and Russia, and they just had a pretty big battle with Austria, it means that their armies are probably still located somewhere in the Balkans. Their armies are probably not crushed, and their armies are, well, still around, and I would rather fight their armies with my full stack and completely annihilate them, rather than leaving myself open after taking their capital, which is quite a rich city. However, that would leave us quite vulnerable. So it might be pretty decent to attack the capital of the Ottomans from the short-term perspective. However, from the long-term perspective, it's actually quite disadvantageous, because it leaves us, well, wide open to an attack on the mainland of Greece, or or Greece proper, essentially, our capital would be in danger if we were to take their capital. That's quite an interesting conundrum because sure you want that income and the prestige associated with taking their capital. However, we're gonna sweep through the Balkans anyway, and so here we go. We're actually gonna attack them. We are trading with both the Ottoman Empire and Persia at this time, so this is actually going to break a few trading agreements, and that's not all that great. However, just sweeping through Thessaloniki here should be... that's actually some heavy damage we took, but should be relatively fine. There's no real danger in doing any of that, and immediately we're gonna march on to Serbia. Because if there is an army located somewhere in the Balkans, it's probably in that general area on the border region between the Ottoman Empire and Austria, seeing as those two are at war and they have been fighting very recently. And yeah, the Ottomans weren't really expecting this. They don't really have anything located near our border, so we should probably find some better trading partners. I was contemplating Venice and France here, because well, Venice is very close. It would mean that the Adriatic essentially becomes our little trading lake, essentially. France is also a good potential customer, I suppose. Sweden as well. All of them are very good. All of them are relatively rich, and so it would be beneficial for us and beneficial just in general to have some very strong trading partners that aren't going to betray us. And I think I actually do, yeah, I do end up going for Venice here because, well, the Adriatic, if we're gonna have a trading lake, might as well make it the Adriatic, right? And overall, I think this was the proper move. Going with Sweden would be interesting. They're overall, I think they're richer than Venice, but Venice likes us already. And so, I think it's actually relatively more positive to go with Venice because they're closer by. There's less danger of the trading route being just raided by like the Barbary states or even the Ottomans because it's so out of way. Whereas if we go with Sweden, we don't know who might trade the trading route all the way over there, right? So we're not capable of defending the trading route all that much. Our navy is still very small and very incapable overall. So I think it's more beneficial to actually pick someone who's closer to you and might not be as rich, but you're very well aware of what your capabilities are. Other than here, I'm just sort of pondering whether the Ottoman armies are going to be close by or not. But overall, yeah, it's basically what I've talked about already. It's basically the fact that the Austrians are fighting the Ottomans. There's probably an army somewhere around there. But ultimately, picking Venice, I think, was a better choice there. And as we edge our way closer towards Serbia, there we go. There's basically a full stack army if you take into account the the supporting troops off to the side there, as well as the garrison divisions or the garrison troops. They essentially have a full stack army there, and that means they probably don't have anything else in the general area because the Ottoman Empire is quite poor during this time period. They're quite weak at the beginning of any campaign, really, and any Total War game that includes them. And they definitely can't support many full stack armies. So if that army basically is located in Serbia, that means that Bulgaria is probably left relatively undefended, meaning that if we build quite a strong secondary army, or at least a half full stack army, half stack army somewhere in Greece and then march on towards Bulgaria, we should be able to just relatively quickly and completely dominate the general area without much resistance. But the time has finally come to launch an attack against Serbia itself. We've given them a turn to get ready and prepared for this whole thing. And the issue with this entire encounter, this is actually quite a big standoff here, because they have an army that's, well, like 3/4 of the entire army is basically composed of just melee units, and the other quarter is composed of elite just line infantry and some really good artillery. The main issue I was having here is that if we attack right now, we'd probably completely annihilate them, but we would take immense heavy losses doing so. And so what I wanted to do is basically bait them out, because if we wait for them to attack us, they obviously have to march towards us, and because their army is mostly melee units, they'd have to march towards us and eventually attack us, meaning we'd get actually quite a few volleys off on those units, and shred them instead. Sure, they might engage in melee and ultimately dominate us or do something really terrible to our units, or at least, you know, do some serious damage. However, it would also mean that we increase our overall potential of just completely annihilating them without taking like 50% casualties or something like that. Because if we were to attack them just head on and completely, you know, just dominate them but take Serbia, it would mean that we take a lot of casualties basically just from their artillery, because they are defending, they don't need too much towards us, they don't need to get tired. Here the Austrians actually sent us just a random division. I was kind of pondering whether I should engage or not, because they sent a single division, but that's really not gonna help. They probably just wanted us to engage them, and so Austria would take the city. The AI is exploiting the player. That's quite a new one. But the overall conundrum was between attacking, taking heavy casualties due to the artillery and the melee infantry, which wouldn't have to run towards us at all, but taking Serbia immediately and weakening them immediately, basically not allowing the Ottomans to potentially gather more armies and counterattack us with an additional full stack army, which would have been terrible. It would mean that we'd actually have some very terrible losses at our hands, and the overall beginning to this anti-Ottoman campaign would be a very bad one, so to say the least. But I sort of called their bluff. They weren't really attacking me here, and they didn't attack for quite a while, but I was not willing to attack them, because, well, we're starving them out, essentially. We are the ones that are we have the time on our hands, we have the time on our side, we can do whatever we want. You don't necessarily want to attack if it's not advantageous to you, even though you might immediately take the city or the settlement. Serbia is not that important, it's not that rich of a city for us to risk taking really serious damage of this. So I was waiting for them to basically counterattack us. And when they did finally decide to attack, it took them basically 3 turns to do anything about it, and well, they starved themselves out to a shadow of their former selves, meaning this battle should be a complete breeze because we are defending, they're mostly melee, and they're mostly starved. And for some reason the balance of power was really against me. It's like 50-50, which is quite strange. So here we go, the first battle of the campaign, and it's with a half-starved, depleted, melee only, or mostly melee, Ottoman army. It's not quite the beginning I would have hoped for, but it's really showcasing what you need to do when you're playing from a position of lesser power. You need to take advantage of your enemies, you need to take advantage of their potential weaknesses, and you need to, well, just take whatever advantage you can get, and this time the advantage provided to us was basically the ability to just starve them out and wait for them, because they're mostly a melee build. They're using mostly a melee build, meaning they have to run towards us and charge us to be, well, actually able to defeat us, right? So, meaning that in this case, because we have such a, well, relatively high quality army, it's mostly line infantry, and the cavalry isn't actually all that great, but the cavalry is mostly meant to just run down people. So, in this case, we have the advantage, even though we are an incredibly minor power. We have quite the advantage on the battlefield because they chose such a strange build. I get it's the Ottomans. The Ottomans are supposed to wield some really good melee units. However, they really didn't balance it out too properly. The cannons themselves, I suppose, were supposed to be the balancing force. Because the artillery that they're wielding is actually really powerful. That's some heavy, powerful artillery. The howitzers are really strong as well, and so you can see what kind of build they were maybe going for, where essentially they cover their own units, their own melee units, charging towards you by really bombarding the opponent with a lot of artillery. At least that's sort of the strategy that I would have utilized with this kind of build. It's not necessarily something I would be really comfortable with, but you could sort of see if the AI is thinking about individual builds. That is, if it is thinking about individual builds. I'm not entirely sure if the AI is programmed that way. But to make full use of this build, you really have to charge forward and cover your own ass with a lot of artillery fire. But because we depleted them so much, and because they starved themselves, essentially, because they were unwilling to use this strategy sooner, and let us starve them basically to half death, this sort of strategy isn't really going to work all that well. And that's mostly because the AI is still the AI, even though this is played on hard difficulty. The Empire Total War AI is still just the AI. That's actually the that's actually the artillery, an artillery crew right there charging us, which is quite strange. But one thing that was actually really advantageous for me is that we were just out of range of their big guns. And this is something that would have been a big issue if we were the attacking force, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't really want to attack Serbia, was that we would have to run towards those artillery pieces. Now, if we are defending, we can just position ourselves out of the range, and because that's not horse-driven artillery, they don't even have any mobility capabilities at all, we can just sit there and wait for the opponent to slowly march towards us and eventually charge us, and we can just hide behind the trenches. Eventually, they obviously do some damage, but it's not even nearly going to be that serious compared to what it would have been if we were to be the attacking force. And here we go, the charge of the Ottoman Brigade. And while, you know, it could have gone actually relatively well for them if they maybe made a giant column and just pierced through my entire line, maybe that would have worked. But because Empire Total War is Empire Total War and the AI is the AI, they never really go for anything like that. Sure, they get some charges in here and there, mostly because of their Delhi cavalry, which is actually some really good cavalry for the Ottomans. That's one thing that the Ottomans really have going for them, is that the cavalry they wield is probably the best in the game. Maybe the British and the Americans, and definitely the French have some really good cavalry, but the Ottomans, their light cavalry is genuinely really annoying, but really good. And most of that annoyance comes from them being really good. But as you can see, even though they have really high tier elite units, because they had to run all this way towards us, they're tired. They're facing down volley after volley from our line infantry, and again the AI is the AI to just break off the attack. That's now that's quite a strange one. That's supposed to be hard difficulty, but I suppose it doesn't really matter. Total War games usually just give the AI some stat bonuses if you actually crank up the difficulty, so I'm not entirely sure. Of course, in some games like Age of Empires, the AI is actually more aggressive. They do actually have some some strategy involved if you do crank up the difficulty, but in Total War games, that's definitely not the case, and it's definitely not the case in Empire Total War, where we're just smashing them. This was basically a full stack army. The odds given to us at the beginning, or basically in the deployment zone, were 50-50. The game was expecting us to have an even fight here, and we're just completely annihilating them. Because, well, we just played it smart. We played to our strengths, or more importantly, we played to our enemy's weakness. Now that's what this is all about, basically. And there we go, complete annihilation, a complete heroic victory. Maybe 600 losses on our side, and we just basically smashed the entire army. There is no coming back from that. That was basically their last-ditch effort of relieving their own whatever fighting strength or forces or whatever. Maybe if the AI was wielding the Greek army, the Ottomans would have had a chance. But because we stayed out of the artillery range, we just annihilated them. That artillery, them not being able to use that artillery, was basically the thing that gave us the victory here. And ultimately, it's also due to the fact that it's the Ottomans. This was a battle against any other major European power. For example, if we're fighting against France here, that would have been a much more difficult fight, because the French don't necessarily have access to any melee units. They definitely would have not relied on any melee units to begin with, because they don't have access to them. They wouldn't build their army in such a strange and weak-minded manner. It's not a weak-minded manner, but you can easily overcome it if you just try. And the lines broken between Russia and Georgia. That's actually a curious one, because Georgia is like a puppet state of Russia in this mod, so, or during the late campaign essentially. So it's quite an interesting one. And the Georgians are no longer at war with the Ottomans, which they were just 5 seconds ago. Instead, they're at war with the Russians themselves. And Russia itself isn't actually looking all that great, which is quite curious, because you would think that because they have such a big empire, those are some terrible losses. That's why you never do auto-resolves for big battles. Because the AI, the auto-resolve thing it's genuinely terrible in this game. You know, as much as people like to complain about Rome 2 Total War having the easiest auto-resolve ever, you just win by numbers and you don't even take that many heavy losses. In this game, the auto-resolves are hell. They're hell because, well, we just faced down like 3 half-dead units, and for some reason we lost the same amount of troops as we did last turn, when we fought a major battle. But anyway, as you can see, Bulgaria is actually basically clean. There's no one there. There's like 3 to 4 units there. We can easily sweep them up. And more importantly, Austria actually took Moldavia, which is quite nice, meaning our northern front is going to be completely secure, and we only have to worry about the Ottomans. And for some reason, Prussia took Moscow. Okay, a bit early for Barbarossa there, Mr. Prussia, but Prussia's really kicking ass. They took the entirety of Poland, Lithuania, and now they have Moscow. And they have Minsk as well, obviously. This is actually quite interesting. That's quite a dominant performance by Prussia. I really didn't expect that. Really didn't expect it from Prussia, because the Prussians were looking actually kind of weak at the beginning. The French were looking really strong. They obviously have Napoleon in charge. Napoleon's a really great country leader, and Munster just died from that. Well, that's a sad state of affairs, but the Prussians are genuinely looking really powerful. This is some like World War I German borders right there. But yeah, so Bulgaria is completely clean, and our northern front is going to be secure, and we only have to worry about Istanbul at this point, or soon to be Constantinople. And obviously, once we manage to deal with the revolts and Serbia and everything like that, once we manage to replenish our forces, we are going to have a splendid old time. The only thing is the AI going to completely smash me in the auto-resolve for Bulgaria? So here we go, time to take Bulgaria, and yeah, they surrendered. Okay, very nice, very nice. But it also means that there's a strange Ottoman army roaming around, so maybe I should have just dealt with them in retrospect. I think it would have been much easier just to completely demolish them with an auto-resolve. But when it comes to this game, you can never really trust the auto-resolves. For some reason, the Serbians are just revolting, even though we have no taxes at all. We just liberated them from the Ottomans. Both of us are Christians, even though the Serbians should be Orthodox. Yeah, the Serbians are Orthodox. I have no idea why. It just doesn't really matter. It's Empire Total War, so we should probably deal with that army. And I decided to ultimately, I think, use the smaller army here. But the most important fact, there we go. The most important fact about capturing Bulgaria here isn't the fact that, well, we have a bit more money, or that we have, well, more taxes to not collect, but we finally have a school. We have a school, and that means we can research some stuff actually, which is something that's been bothering me for quite a while. Now, the biggest, I don't know, con to this whole thing, the worst thing about this whole thing is that it's a school, it's not a university. And so that means that, well, it's gonna take quite a while to research anything, meaning that we're gonna have to hurry the hell up. But thanks, Kings, for watching. This was the second episode of the Greek playthrough on the Augustus Maximus channel of Greece in Empire Total War using the Minor Factions Revenge mod. And see you next time.